Wow, y'all really liked my last Undertale video. Guess I gotta do another. It's not controversial in the slightest to say that Undertale has a good soundtrack. To be honest, remixes are half the reason the game's known in the first place. So, like every other YouTuber who's covered Undertale before or since, I feel obligated to rank all of the songs from worst to best. Although, I'm gonna be doing things a bit differently. See, if you're making a YouTube playlist or something, do you really need all 101 songs on the soundtrack? Do you need to hear Ooh, which is just 2 straight minutes of ambiance? How about Ghost Fight, which is just dummy but shorter and objectively worse? No! A lot of the 101 songs are just tunes repeated, sometimes as a reprise, sometimes as an upgraded version, and sometimes as a joke. I'm cutting all the ones that are just ambiance, just jokes, or just 7 seconds of somebody playing the bass. I'll be merging all the ones that are basically the same together, so Ghost Fight gets rubbed in with Dummy, Nyahehe with Bone Trousel, and all of the dating themes with each other, since realistically, they're all supposed to make up a greater whole. Don't expect any of these to appear on the list. I'll also be including 2 songs that technically aren't on the soundtrack, but one is in the game regardless, and one is so heavily associated with it that I think it deserves to be here anyway. That leaves us with a grand total of 52 entries, so I won't be able to spend a lot of time on each. To pretend this is a bit more scientific, I'll be scoring each song based on 3 criteria: the actual quality of their original, weighted at 50%, how well it's used in-game, 30%, and how well it can be remixed or covered, 20%, since we know that's half of what's keeping this community alive. I'll be playing what I think is the best part of the song in the background while I talk. With all that said, let's get on to the absolute worst. To be honest, I don't even know why Song That Might Play When You Fight Sans is on the soundtrack. It's literally never used in the game. It doesn't fit Sans in the slightest. It's ridiculously high energy, never slowing down to be a bit more contemplative or anything. Being so fast would also mean that it gets insanely repetitive. It's only a minute long and doesn't know how to chill, so it'd get really boring after about 5 minutes. It's just 1 minute of unfinished speed that doesn't fit the character it's for in the slightest. It's a fun Easter egg, but there's a reason this was cut. It makes sense that Toby put the least effort into the songs that people wouldn't really hear, and there's nowhere that shines more than Wrong Enemy. It's a short song for a secret boss that you can only encounter by either showing up at a perfect time or changing your system clock. It completely changes halfway through, and not in a good way. Plus, it's absolutely too 8-bit. It's fine, but yeah, I'm glad the song wasn't more prominent in the actual game. The first actual important song on the list, Here We Are, suffers from just having a bit too much ambiance. It's pretty fitting to the True Lab, a kind of creepy and mysterious tune for a weird area, although I'm not sure why there's so much piano. You can't really remix it well or remember the tune, since the whole appeal is that it's repetitive and more for atmosphere, and outside of the situation it's used in, it's just not that much fun to listen to. This might be my most controversial ranking on the whole list. I do not understand the hype around Stronger Monsters. The initial tune starts so absurdly aggressive that it just does not fit the moment. I mean, yeah, they're stronger, but it's not a freaking jump scare. Plus, the intervals and chord progressions used throughout the song just really do not work for me. It's a lot of fifths, which work great on their own, but not when they're repeated. All that being said, this little bit at 30 seconds really saves the song for me. But after that, it just goes back to being the somewhat unpleasant intervals of before. Now that we're done with that, we're moving on to the 70s, the songs that I think are solid. I have some issues with them, but overall they're good and I like them. They're the B tiers. I won't skip them if I'm listening to the soundtrack, but maybe I'll consider it. This next spot with a score of 71 is a tie, the first of many, between Home and Amalgam. Home is some nice acoustic guitar, which I can appreciate, but it's not much more than that. It's cozy and that's nice, but there's just not a whole lot to it besides the Undertale motif, and tons of other songs do that better. Home works, but it's just not much to listen to outside of that. And then there's Amalgam, which suffers from the same problems as Here We Are, although not as bad. In an effort to sound weird, it unfortunately kinda loses the appeal of what makes a song nice to listen to in the first place. But it's higher energy, so it's better out of context, plus it has a more solid beat and tune, so it'd be more interesting to make something new out of it. Your Best Friend is a weird one, since it's literally just an 8-bit version of that song about friends from SpongeBob, and it's also just a joke song that's meant to trick you into thinking this flower is gonna be nice to you. Still, you don't instantly realize it's a joke, so I think it should count. I mean, it's a fine tune, but it's also under 30 seconds long and entirely composed of little 8-bit crunches, so it can't really go any higher than this. And tied with it is Alphys. I want to start by saying it fits the character really well. It's an awkward tune for an awkward person. It makes sense. Problem is, I don't like awkward. The harmonies are sometimes really nice, and I like this bit at 30 seconds. It almost sounds like Alphys is really getting into her element. But after that, it's a bit repetitive, and the intro is just not for me. Plus, if you tried to remix it, you might lose some of the stuff that made it unique in the first place. Ruins is next up, alongside Snowy and Don't Give Up. The most accurate thing I think I can say about Ruins is that it feels like a tutorial for the rest of the soundtrack. Not that it sounds like a normal tutorial song, in fact it's pretty unique when you look at a lot of other games. It just doesn't feel quite as complex or in-depth as a lot of the other pieces to come. I don't think it quite fits to a place called The Ruins. It's too upbeat. All that being said, I still really like it. The solo piano is super nice, and then you get a sort of beat drop as a few other instruments come in. It's solid, just a bit out of place. Snowy is kind of a similar story. It's a bit more bare bones than a lot of the other songs on the soundtrack, which is really fitting for a wintry forest, but unfortunately, it also doesn't make it much to listen to. Starting with a calm piano is a good choice, and I like how chilled out it is. The weird yet nice chord progression gives it a feeling of being slightly unsettling, which is perfect for a dark and quiet snow-covered forest. I love it when the strings come in, but then they just sort of cut out really fast, so the tune doesn't quite have the progression of some of the other regional themes. I feel like it can make for a really good remix, but there's just not much to the original. At 76 points is Respite. What I like about this one compared to Snowy is that the song goes somewhere. It starts off with contemplative piano, just the same, but then the beat sort of drops at 36 seconds, the piano pedals press down, and suddenly it gets so emotional. Plus there's this really fantastic chord right at 52 seconds. It's kind of just a piano remix of some motifs from earlier, but I like the execution a bit better. And the third entry at 76 points is Bring It In Guys, the song right after on the soundtrack. This is one of the longest entries on the entire list, since it's supposed to wrap up the whole game. It starts out as a remix of Enemy Approaching, but then it transitions into these little references, like a tune from Papyrus's themes, and then Snowdin Town, and then it changes completely to a remix of Spear of Justice. You get the idea. It feels a little weird to rank the end credits theme, because since it's trying to fit all the previous songs in, it doesn't have a great unique defining theme. It's a solid wrap up to the game, but that's kind of it. I really appreciate the effort that went into it, but you can only rank a credits song so high, you know? Waterfall is next. It's a slow, methodical, foreboding tune for an area that's really trying to build tension. The bells, the haunting sounds in the background, the super deep tone, I like the way it's made. When you're playing through the game listening to this, it's really, really good. Outside of that though, it just doesn't grab me the same way that a lot of the other area themes do. It feels just slightly too slow, but at the same time that if you sped it up, you would lose its ambient power. I feel like you could change some stuff up to make it awesome, but it just doesn't quite do it for me. Tied with Waterfall is Finale. I want to start out negative, saying the beat feels a little bit off when it comes in, simultaneously very intense but also quiet. Plus it's sort of just a replay of Hopes and Dreams. I think you're noticing a pattern at this point that a lot of the songs I rated lower are just remixed, somewhat less interesting versions of previous songs. But then the beat drops at 57 seconds, and suddenly, I'm back on board. This feels like a genuine play on what made Hopes and Dreams fun, which was how goddamn over the top it is. Just a bombastic way to finish the True Pacifist run off. Start Menu is a very, very simple song. It's basically just an 8-bit version of the Undertale motif over a basic beat, supposed to give the idea of an old-fashioned RPG. I'd rate it quite low if it wasn't for the reprise. Menu Full only appears in the game very briefly, but man is it fun. It's a souped up version of the menu theme that you can only get after the true ending, so you almost never hear it, but it's so rewarding to have a genuinely great menu song after accomplishing so much. Hotel is next. It's a solid tune that's supposed to be in-universe background music, which makes it perfect for putting in YouTube videos. This makes the sped up version, Can You Really Call This a Hotel? I Didn't Receive a Mint on My Pillow or Anything, the second most used song from the soundtrack on my channel. It's a nice piece that's really good at fitting a lot of different situations, but it's so dependent on its unique sound that I don't know if it'd really work if you tried to change it. It's very good for what it is, and nothing more. Next up is the song just titled Sands. It's supposed to be a fun little tune that shows up a couple times when you meet the character Sans, and it does a perfect job representing him. It's a pretty basic song when it comes down to it, using just a couple of notes in a chill but playful way. I love the trombone that comes in every now and then in the background, not only since it's a reference to Sans being able to play the trombone, but also because the super deep brass just fits him so well. And it's just generally pleasant to listen to, what can I say? Reunited is just another version of the Undertale motif with some extra content thrown in, but I don't know, I really like this one. It's got some great harmonies built in, and the intro is just really comforting. Plus, the song doesn't really kick in until the beat drop at 143. That's when the bass and drums come in, and that makes the moment at 243, when basically everything drops out for a good 15 seconds, hit so much harder. And then it comes back, changing up the instruments and adding a trombone. It takes a while to build a unique identity, and I think there are some songs that can do the Undertale motif better, but I still really like it. Alright, that's all of the 70s. Now it's time for the 80s, the ones that I think are good. The A-tiers. I won't have many issues, but probably not much to gush about either. Starting off is actually a complete exception to that rule, Your Best Nightmare. This might legitimately be the most unusual song on the whole soundtrack, which is both a blessing and a curse. It's perfect for the insane chaos it's made for, but also makes it hard to remember due to not having a ton of structure. My biggest issue with the song is the little pauses for each of the 6 souls to do their thing. It's great in the game itself, but it kinda takes you out of the moment if you listen to it in any other context. All that being said, the sheer unique insanity of it and how well it's used in-game bumps it up quite a few spots. Next up is Once Upon a Time. The very first song on the soundtrack, it's just the piece that goes over the little optional exposition dump. It's supposed to be reminiscent of early RPGs, since that's what Undertale is all about deconstructing, so it uses a lot of electronic instruments and 8-bit chirps. It's slow, but unlike Waterfall, I feel like it really earns it. It's just a nice little tune, although very basic. It's Showtime is kind of a similar story. It's Mettaton's simple little intro song, so it's going to be a bit more basic than a lot of the songs on the soundtrack. The motif it's using is the best one associated with him, which is a pretty big plus. It makes you really feel like you're going onto a quiz show, so it's perfect for him. The song's quite short, but it's really more supposed to be an intro, so I can't fault it for that. I just like it. Oh, One True Love is kind of slow and boring, but what saves it from the pit of mediocrity is its counterpart, Oh, a Dungeon, which is just a hilarious concept. It takes this slow, emotional piece and then turns it into an action song where you have to get through a puzzle while a fire slowly approaches. Very short, very simple, very effective. Temmie Village is our next step up. It's a song for a very silly part of the game, and it really feels like it. It's the only a cappella track in Undertale, only punctuated with a cowbell and some bird chirps. It's generally just ridiculous, but despite that, the tune is very pleasant and generally fun. It's probably not something you would actively search for, but it's a nice little breather between some of the more intense songs. Another joke tune is up, Dog Song. While Temmie Village is electronic a cappella, Dog Song is just a series of dog barks pitched up and down to create a surprisingly fun little song. It's absolutely not meant to be taken seriously, but despite that, I can't help but appreciate the little weird slowdowns and the high energy. It really feels like an overexcited little puppy. Plus, this is one of those songs that, despite not being too special in-game, sounds really great played on piano, so it holds a special place in my heart for that, too. Halfway through this 4-way tie for 83 points is Snowed in Town. This is pretty much just an upgraded version of Snowy with more energy, more creative uses of instruments, and more charm, and as a result, I just like it a whole lot more. The pizzicato strings and the bells in the background are what really do it for me. Next is Death Report, which is a play on live reports. You might be surprised to see this one so high up, but listening back to it, it's remarkably epic for a 48-second song. Starting with the giant chords in the piano into everything suddenly coming in at 24 seconds, people chanting in the background like it's some sort of mission from God. I don't know, I really like it. My only wish is that it was longer. Anticipation is next. I'll be honest with you, the version of the song on the soundtrack is not good. What makes Anticipation work is when you slow it down for the No Mercy route. It suddenly goes from this jokey little drum beat to a slow-paced horror movie score. You can't really remix it, and it's just fine listening to it on its own, but it is perfect for its uses in Undertale's worst route. The only thing dragging it down is that it's just okay in the pacifist run. Now for the song that comes along when you die. It's Determination Time. If you want some nice use of 8-bit, this is the track for you, harmonizing perfectly at a pleasant pitch. It manages to be both comforting and tragic by staying almost entirely in the key of D minor throughout the 50-second song. It's somber, fitting, and sounds awesome on piano. And tied with determination is the theme of the person most likely to cause you to die. It's Spear of Justice. It starts out with 3 perfect high-energy establishing power chords, G, C, then G again. It repeats and adds a beat underneath, then changes key. It's fantastic at keeping up the pace. And then the brass comes in. It's just really good. It's perfect for the character, the scene, and on its own. Then there's Metal Crusher. Normally I would dock some points for it being 2/8-bit, but this is the theme to a robot, so I can't really blame it for that. Staying in the same bass 2 minor chords gives it a feeling of not really going anywhere, which really works for a quiz show setting. It makes it feel like a bit-crushed version of the theme to Jeopardy or something. It fits, it's fun on its own, but it would also make for a really cool remix. The second part of this 4-way tie is Spider Dance. It plays off the mini-boss theme that Toby establishes in Ghost Fight and Dummy, but adapts it in a lot of really cool ways that makes it original anyway. For example, that awesome intro, which is just a descending F minor chord, and then the quick high notes that really make it feel like a sort of spider dance. My only real critique is that it's a bit too 8-bit, and unlike Metal Crusher, it doesn't really have an excuse for being that way. But since the bass tune is so solid, you can still create a fantastic saxophone cover or something. Now for the first song that's technically not on the soundtrack, Megalo Strike Back. This song's not actually associated with Undertale in any way, but it's become so tied up with Kara by the fans that it's practically official anyway. I think the intro is a bit too long, but it pays off when out of nowhere it comes in with a completely different 8-bit tune. That 8-bit thankfully doesn't stick around for too long, instead moving into the same song on a different instrumentation, which leads back into the intro, only with the 8-bit overlaid. It's just a really solidly built little song, which lends itself to being remixed really well. Finishing off our group of 4 is Enemy Approaching, the most common fight song in the game. It strikes a really good balance between electronic and orchestral, and the feeling it establishes is pretty apt. It's something that's clearly dangerous, but doesn't really have it in you to actually hurt you. Plus, convincing them out of it is going to be really fun. I like that this one's in a major key. It makes it stand out from most of the other fight themes, which are mostly minor, giving it the feeling of something a bit more lighthearted. My only real critique is that it's a bit short for something used so often. Finally, taking his rightful spot moderately high up on the list, it's Papyrus's themes, Nyahehe and Bone Trussel. These just sound ridiculous, like a 1920s cartoon villain who's tied somebody to the tracks. Starting with a beat was a great choice. It establishes right out the gate that this is a high-energy song for a high-energy guy. The tune gives it a little feeling of intrigue too, which is perfect for somebody so associated with puzzles. It's kind of weird how short it is, not even a full minute, but it's just really fun. Plus, I love the little instrument change at 33 seconds in. Check it out. That almost sounds like an evil laugh all on its own. Speaking of which, it's time for our other special feature song, Mad Mew Mew. This is one of the most off-the-wall sounding tracks ever composed for the game. It starts right out the gate at full power and immediately subverts the first notes of Spider Dance. It's perfect for the ridiculous situation it was composed for. The murderous ghost inhabiting the dummy you fought earlier has moved into a different body, a life-size anime doll. Now in this form, they're going to torment you until they can finally fuse with their new host. And it's perfect. My favorite part is the beat drop at 36 seconds, which is the most over-the-top version of the dummy motif. Completely changing vibes, it's Core. The song is very similar to Another Medium in a lot of ways, but with more electronic instruments, it carves out its own personality. I also love the muted piano in the background. It sounds like something that would play in an elevator. It gets across the vibe of a machine that's simply impossible to understand in its sheer scale, which is exactly what it needed to do. Just slightly above it is Last Goodbye, aka Finale but better. It's a replay of the same stuff from Hopes and Dreams, but throws in a lot of little new things, like this bit at 18 seconds. Being the true end credit song, it makes sense to use the most iconic tune from the most iconic ending. It transitions into something a bit more standard at 45 seconds, a soft piano, and stays there for a while. But why does you expect that to be it? It comes back bombastic one more time with an electric guitar riff. It plays on exactly what it needs to be fun, and then breaks your friggin' heart when it plays the Undertale motif on solo piano. Now that we're done with the A tiers, it's time for the S tiers. The ones that are pretty much great all around, who scored 90% plus. Just 11 left. Starting off column, we have It's Raining Somewhere Else. This somber piano song with a storm in the background sets the mood immediately. 4 soft piano chords muffled by the weather. Then the melody comes in, distinctly melancholy, but not too sad. The piano and rain cut out and are replaced with vibraphone and bass, which brings you back to the reality of the hotel. Not only is the song just good, but it sets the mood perfectly. And suddenly, completely switching gears, we have Asgore/Bergentrocken. It's a very solid, somewhat stereotypical final boss theme, going all out to make itself sound epic. An orchestral sound accented with 8-bit blips and haunting chanting. It's not really supposed to be the final boss music, but even then, it's clear a lot of craft went into making it feel like it the first time around. Asgore masterfully plays off the motifs in previous songs like Heartache. It's just generally really good. Okay, I have no reason to rank this one as high as I have. Bird That Carries You Over a Disproportionately Small Gap is a 25-second joke song, only used in one location, but despite that, it manages to be truly grand. It's genuinely really funny, this tiny little duck fully carrying your character over this tiny pool of water, while epic music plays in the background. I absolutely love this song, and you can't stop me. And now for the dating themes. Wow, I really started S tier off with 2 of the most serious songs in the whole game, and then completely whiplashed to 2 utter jokes. What I like about this one is just how well integrated it is with the story. Dating Start is a bit generic, but that's sort of the point. It's the calm when you get things figured out. But as your date power rises, the song changes, first to the uncomfortable, flustered dating tense, then the extreme, over-the-top dating fight. Plus, all of them are technically remixes of the Snowdin theme, which is pretty cool. My only wish is that dating fight would be longer and also used when talking to Undyne. It would be so fitting. Now that we're done with the jokes, it's time for the best area theme in the game. Well, besides one we'll get to later. Another medium is truly fantastic. It starts off feeling weird and uncaring, fading in with constantly moving, not quite minor electronic notes. They stay throughout almost the entire piece, giving the feeling that the core and the lava it sits in are constantly chugging away in the background. And then at 50 seconds in, comes that iconic, crunchy electronic beat. I've used this one in so many videos for a reason. Battle Against a True Hero is next, and it really lives up to its epic name. Beginning with a calm, collected, contemplative piano, and then quickly blossoming into a high-energy war song. This is one of the most layered tracks in the game, with a ton of different instruments playing over top of each other. But after a minute and a half of high-energy fight music, you need a break, so it calms down and reverts to the melancholy piano of the start. And then it comes back in, bombastic as ever. It's really, really fun, and maybe the single most epic sounding song on the soundtrack. Completely changing vibes again, we've got Good Night. The very last song on the soundtrack, it completes the story that once upon a time began. Good Night is just a slow, calm piano version of the same Undertale motif, but, you know, sometimes that's all you have to be. It's the true, genuine, for real this time, ending for the whole game. Just a handful of slow, sweet notes being played on the piano. Then there's Heartache. The boss theme that started it all, it's one of the best. This track really needs some love. It gets overlooked in favor of songs for more iconic moments all of the time, but man, it is something special too. It starts with the 8-bit you're used to at this point, but expands and develops it into a full band piece. It gets everything you could want out of a fight song. It's intense, it's emotional, and it's memorable. It gets across exactly the right feeling for the moment, while staying interesting on its own too. Hopes and Dreams and Save the World are tracks that have already hyped up a lot this video, but it needs it. It starts all orchestral, but then comes in strong with an electric guitar. It's an adaptation of the Undertale motif into a rock ballad, a perfect theme for the final fight of the most iconic route. Hopes and Dreams is grand, but fittingly it doesn't sound quite as nihilistic as something like Your Best Nightmare. It's for a scene about saving the main villain from his horrible fate, so naturally it's gonna sound, well, hopeful. And while Burn in Despair is a low point to make you feel hopeless, it gets completely outshined when you gain the ability to save, and Save the World comes in strong. 9.3 out of 10, no notes except that Burn in Despair could have been a bit more engaging. I will not apologize for how absurdly high I've ranked the song Dummy. It's the most distilled form of one of the best motifs in the entire game, 2.5 moments of pure mini-boss insanity. It starts off just like Ghost Fight, but then expands outward into something weirder. It's just right for the fight, it's manic, and just like the Mad Dummy itself, it has a tendency to repeat the same phrase 3 times. It's jazzy, high energy, off-putting, and fun, and the weird electronic sounds that make it the melody just add to it. Dummy is fantastic, and there's no denying it. Just before we get into the final 3, I've got to go over the 4th place spot, which in my eyes sort of acts like a second main theme for the game. Fallen Down is incredibly simple, yet simultaneously unbelievably comforting. The beginning notes combine an F major and A minor chord to create something in between. It's the start of an emotional, sweet little adventure. I'm ranking it mostly off the reprise, which halfway through cuts into the Undertale motif again. But man, it just fits the song so well that I can't bring myself to get tired of it. Plus, this is another that just sounds fantastic on piano. Alright, now for the final 3. All of these ended up scoring a 98 out of 100, but for the sake of the list, I didn't want to rank them together. Technically they're all tied, but that would be a kind of boring finale, so instead I ranked them and I'll be doing a classic countdown. With that said, let's get to the final 3. If you knew anything about Undertale when you started this video, you knew this song was going to be in the top 3. It's Megalovania, the most famous track from the game, and it's not even close. What really puts it over the top is its relevance to the story, to the point that I felt like I had to not just make a half-hour video on the scene it's from, but also break the criteria to give it an 11 out of 10. In a game of mostly fun songs, jokes, or orchestral pieces, Megalovania is the standout heavy metal finale to the game's most high-stakes route. It is a melody so recognizable that half the internet can name it off of just the first 4 notes. Is the song overrated? Yes, it's a bit overhyped, and I'm not a fan of the first 8 seconds being so 8-bit. But is it good? 100% yes. And on top of everything else, it's easy to remix due to having a melody, bass, and a beat that are fairly easy to separate and play. My favorite part is when after almost 2 minutes of intensity, we get 30 straight seconds of bass solo. But Megalovania is beaten by one other boss theme, one that I've used in 4 different videos purely because of how much I liked it.
Oh, yes.
Death by Glamour. It's unique in the game for being one of the least 8-bit sounding tracks, which is great contrast, especially considering you've heard Metal Crusher right before it. I almost don't know what to say. There's a dozen different equally great things about the song, from the way the piano builds at the start, to the complicated layers throughout the piece, to the classic Mettaton sounds coming in to form the melody for some parts. It is 2 entirely different fantastic beat drops. One at 104 that sounds mysterious and majestic, and another at 130 that brings it back to the classic jazzy style Mettaton is known for. It oozes ego and splendor out of every pore. It's so good. It's such a perfectly crafted song, and in my opinion, the best boss theme in the whole game. But there is one more track that is just a bit better. The single best location theme in the entire game, and the best song, period. It's the tune named for the game itself, Undertale. It starts out simple with an acoustic guitar playing the main motif. A piano comes in, playing the theme you've come to recognize throughout the whole game. After a minute and a half, however, it gains, becoming just a bit more epic as you reflect on your journey throughout the game so far. It cuts out for a moment as a woodwind part comes in, and then everything comes back. This song plays as you take your final walk through New Home on the neutral and pacifist runs, when you finally understand the Undertale. It's a perfect representation of every part of the game's story, the hopes, the dreams, and the tragedy. The song is perfectly layered in a way where everything is important, but none of the instruments get in each other's way. And then that key change at 520, man, that is something special. This is easily the longest song on the track, but it really makes listening to the whole thing worth it. And then, right at the end, almost everything cuts out again, just leaving you with the simple Undertale motif one more time. With all that said, that's my list. Here it is on a tier list. Feel free to photograph and complain about it on social media. If you hated the video, please leave a dislike and a comment telling me how I can improve. If you liked it, I can't force you to do anything. With all that said, thank you, goodbye, and I'll see you sometime in the future.